Up next on the broadcast, U.S. intelligence officials confirmed that a ground-to-air missile shot down a Malaysia Airlines plane over Ukraine, but it's not certain who fired it. All 298 passengers and crew on board did not survive. Korean farmers protest a move by the government to liberalize the rice market starting next year to abide by WTO agreements, but officials assure that domestic producers will be protected through tariff measures. After sports talks broke down between the two Koreas on Thursday, the regime has accused Seoul of acting in bad faith over issues like the size of the North Korean flag. The South has asked Pyongyang to come back with sincerity. Primetime News begins now. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Primetime News, coming live to you from Seoul. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Cheri, and we start today overseas with a developing story on the Malaysia Airlines plane that went down and killed all those on board. Close to 300 people were on the passenger plane when it was shot down over eastern Ukraine.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, are investigators any closer to determining who caused the fully packed jetliner to fall out of the sky?
Well, U.S. officials suspect pro-Russian separatists are responsible for the alleged attack and believe that the evidence so far shows flight MH17 was shot out of the sky by a sophisticated surface-to-air missile. As for the flight data recorders, the European Body of Security and Cooperation says they're currently in the hands of the separatists, while other reports indicate the plane's black box has already been sent to Moscow. But as our Shin Se-min reports, the investigation is just getting started.
U.S. intelligence officials have confirmed that a ground-to-air missile brought down the plane, although it's still not clear who fired it.
With respect to the Malaysia Airlines disaster today in Ukraine, I'm closely monitoring the reports. There is a clear need a full and transparent international investigation.
Ukraine's intelligence agency has since released audio of a purported telephone conversation between pro-Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine. They are heard talking about the downed jet and seem confused about the presence of a passenger plane in the airspace above them. The tape has not been independently verified, but it has added credence to suspicions that rebel forces are to blame.
We do not exclude the possibility that this plane was also shot down and stressed that Ukrainian armed forces did not perform any actions to fire at targets in the air.
In this regard, I want to emphasize that this tragedy would not have happened if there were peace on that land, and in any case, if the military activities had not resumed in the southeast of Ukraine.
According to Malaysian Airlines, the majority of passengers on board were from the Netherlands, followed by Malaysia with 44 nationals. And so far, the identified passengers were from a total of 10 countries, while a remaining 20 passengers have yet to be verified. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
So, needless to say that it was truly a tragic end to so many lives, and authorities are still confirming the passenger list, but already we're seeing that they represented an array of nationalities.
Right, and we now know that there were 3 infants and several vacationing families on board. Let's go back now to the newsroom. Paul, there appears to be further details that a leading group of scientists was also among the victims.
That's right. Australian media says a delegation of more than 100 people was en route to Melbourne to attend a global conference on AIDS and HIV. They included top officials, researchers, and medical doctors who were at the forefront of their fields. And
of course, this is the second time in less than, 5 months now that Malaysia Airlines has faced disaster, this type of disaster.
Right, that was Flight 370, which vanished just in March while carrying 239 people, and now the downing of Flight 17 with nearly 300 on board.
That's right. Flight 370 remains missing to this day, with no signs of any wreckage and more questions than answers about its fate. Our Kim Min-ji has more on the recent tragedies and even another from more than 30 years ago that holds eerie similarities.
It is with intense regret that Malaysia Airlines announces and confirms that we've received notification from the Ukrainian air traffic control that we lost contact with the aircraft MH17 at 14:15 GMT.
In the span of less than 5 months, some 530 people have been killed while flying on Malaysia Airlines planes. It puts the future of the company in question. Even before Flight 370 went missing in March, the airliner was in a shaky financial state and ticket sales have plummeted since. The successive disasters are sure to taint the image of the company. The crisis also brings to mind a similar attack from 3 decades earlier. In 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 bound for Seoul from New York was shot down by a Soviet fighter plane, killing all 269 people on board. The attack came during the peak of the Cold War and further heightened tensions between the West and the Soviet Union. The Korean airliner was shot down after being mistaken as a reconnaissance plane. The downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 and the death of nearly 300 innocent lives appears to also be the result of tensions between states. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And moving on to other stories of the day, after North Korea surprised its global audience by announcing earlier this year its wish to participate in the upcoming Asian Games to be held in South Korea's Incheon. Now it says it's rethinking the whole thing while accusing the South of acting in bad faith. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
North Korea threatened Friday to reconsider its decision to participate in the upcoming Incheon Asian Games, pinning the failure of Thursday's working-level talks squarely on the South. Through its state-run Korean Central News Agency Friday, the North criticized the South Korean delegation for what it called an insincere attitude in the latter half of the meeting, claiming it came under the directive of the presidential office of Cheongwade. It accused the South of taking issue with the number of North Korean cheerleaders and the size of the North Korean flag that would be used during the Games. Should Seoul maintain such a stance, Pyongyang threatened to reconsider its plans to participate in the sporting event. South Korea's Unification Ministry expressed deep regrets about North Korea's angry outburst and called for Pyongyang to return to talks with sincerity. The two Koreas met at the border village of Panmunjom on Thursday to discuss the details of the 700 North Korean athletes and cheerleaders that were planning to make the trip south for the Incheon Asian Games, which begin in September. But when South Korea asked for more details on its plans and said it would accommodate the North Korean delegation just as it would any other team that's participating in the Games, North Korea walked away, questioning Seoul's motives. The two sides have not set a date for their next meeting. While some experts had hoped the Asian Games could become a platform for improved inter-Korean ties, Thursday's meeting shows that the two sides still remain far apart. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And staying with North Korea, the United Nations Security Council has denounced North Korea's recent series of short-range ballistic missile tests. Officials say the fact that the Security Council has even addressed this issue shows how seriously the international community views the situation. Choi Yoo-sun tells us more.
Following a closed-door meeting on Thursday, the United Nations Security Council called on North Korea to stop its recent series of short-range ballistic missile tests.
The members of the Security Council condemned these launches as violations of Security Council resolutions 1718 in 2006, 1874, 2009, 2087, 2013 and 2094, 2013, and urged the DPRK to fully comply with the relevant Security Council resolutions.
The Council's condemnation comes after Pyongyang launched 3 rounds of Scud short-range ballistic missiles between June 29th and July 13th toward the East Sea of the Korean Peninsula. For conducting 3 nuclear tests and repeatedly testing its short to long-range ballistic missiles since 2006, North Korea has been banned by the UN from any type of ballistic missile or nuclear-related activity. The Council had previously released a statement denouncing the North's medium-range Nodong missile launch in March. South Korean officials say it's very unusual for the Security Council to discuss the regime's short-range missile testing.
It's meaningful that the Council and not the North Korea Sanctions Committee discussed the issue after recognizing that the frequent short-range missiles on the Korean peninsula were threatening international peace and security.
Pyongyang is expected to protest the latest statement out of the United Nations. In response to the statement in March, North Korea threatened to carry out what it called a new form of nuclear test. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime News, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Turning to the economy, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol has stressed the importance of the central bank's independence in deciding the key rate as it encounters growing pressure to make a cut. His remarks come just a day after newly appointed Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan hinted his support for a rate cut to spur economic growth. During a meeting with the heads of local banks, Governor Lee said a rate decision should be made by the BOK's Monetary Policy Committee. The central bank recently trimmed the country's growth outlook for this year to 3.8% from an earlier 4%, blaming the April ferry disaster, which eased domestic demand and damaged the Consumer Sentiment Index. The Korean government will open its rice market next year to comply with its agreement with the WTO. It was a decision that came after much deliberation, but has been met with fierce resistance from farmers' unions in the country. Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
Korea will open its rice market next year. Agriculture Minister Lee Dong-pil said Friday that it's simply too costly to import more rice, which was the trade-off for postponing rice market liberalization. Korea promised to open up its rice market under a 1994 agreement with the World Trade Organization, but because rice is a Korean staple food, the country was allowed to push back the date for 20 years in exchange for gradually raising its rice import quota. That extension is set to expire at the end of this year.
The import quota of over 400,000 tons this year, which makes up 9% of the nation's total rice consumption based on 2013, is a heavy burden on the nation's overall rice market, especially when rice consumption continues to drop in Korea.
While the government says it will protect the domestic market by imposing high tariffs on foreign rice, it did not provide specific numbers. Pundits are expecting the tariff rate to fall at around 400%. They say that level of tariff would ensure that Korean rice maintains its price competitiveness against Chinese or American rice, which can cost half the price or even less. The government also laid out plans to support the nation's rice industry through an insurance program meant to stabilize rural household incomes. Korean farmers, however, on Friday continued a massive protest that began the day before. They said they intended to protect the nation's food sovereignty that the government seems to have handed away.
The government is giving our jar of rice to the U.S. and China or other countries that are rich in grain. This will never guarantee the food security of Koreans.
The government plans to set the nation's tariff rate on rice and have it verified by the WTO by this September. It said it will work hard to gain full understanding from local farmers about the change. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
South Korea and China are making slow but steady progress in bilateral free trade talks, and like the changes to the domestic rice market we just mentioned, agriculture has continued to be a sticking point in this FTA. Our Song Ji-sun has more on Seoul and Beijing's 12th round of trade negotiations.
South Korea and China have been working to draw up a free trade deal for more than 2 years now, and the two sides are drawing closer to an agreement.
We have made notable progress in this round of negotiations. We have reached an agreement in principle on market liberalization in the service and investment sectors.
The two sides agreed to start with a positive list approach, in which they will list items and areas to be liberalized, and then switch to a negative list approach within a certain period of time. In a negative list agreement, all items and services are liberalized with the exception of those named. It represents the first time Beijing has agreed to this approach. As for products and sensitive agriculture industry, the two sides are still narrowing differences, but Seoul is firm that it won't allow cheaper Chinese products to take hold of the domestic market.
When we moved into the second stage of the FTA talks, we were sure that we could protect our agricultural sector by including the majority of our products in the extremely sensitive list. China, on the other hand, wants steel and machineries included in the list.
The two sides were eager to make progress at these negotiations, the first since Presidents Park Geun-hye and Xi Jinping agreed in summit talks early this month to finalize a bilateral trade pact by the end of this year. The next round of negotiations is set for September in China. 송지선, Arirang News, Sejong.
Korea's most popular animated cartoon characters are winning over countless young fans around the world and are taking home plenty of awards to boot. Riding on this wave, Korea has pulled out all the stops for its largest character fair, currently underway in Seoul. Park Ji-won has more.
This adorable feline character is one of the most popular emoticons on Korea's mobile messaging application KakaoTalk. It's been downloaded more than 1 million times since it was first introduced in 2012. If cats aren't your thing, how about a sleep-loving sloth? This sloth character embodies the slow life that some of us might miss in this busy modern society we live in. It would be remiss if we didn't mention Pororo, perhaps the most widely recognizable Korean character worldwide. The children's animation has been exported to some 130 countries since it debuted in the early 2000s. Following in the lovable penguin's tracks is Larva, another successful character that now has a presence in 105 countries.
It doesn't have any language, it doesn't have any dialogue. It's a simple slapstick comedy that everybody easy to understand, so I think that's the main reason.
From instant messenger emoticons to healing icons, Korea's character industry is expanding rapidly. In just 6 years, the export volume of Korean characters has more than doubled, and from 2010 to 2012, the export volume grew at an average growth rate over 22% every year.
Well, I've been visiting Korea since the early 1990s in the licensing business. I've really seen the industry grow and become a very mature, and it's really grown to world-class level, particularly with a lot of the innovative properties.
I think there's definitely a maturing of the licensing market here. People are more aware of the value of an effective strategic licensing program, how it could help create more awareness for their brand or their character, and how it could also help them create a significant revenue stream.
All these characters and many others can be found at the Seoul Character and Licensing Fair being held at COEX through this Sunday. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now it's time to get a recap of this week's domestic headlines. Our Yurian joins us.
Good evening. Let's first take a look at a special series by the Joseonilbo, which interviewed renowned experts on Northeast Asia. Now, the purpose was to talk about the changing political dynamics in the region, particularly with the United States trying to increase its presence here. Now, you see here Jonathan Pollock, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution that specializes in East Asian international politics. Now, he says the United States is more concerned about South Korea's damaged relationship rather than with South Korea's growing relationship with China. The summit talks between Korea and China earlier this month show that the countries are edging closer together, which Pollock says is good news for the United States as it will add stability to the region. Now, he goes on to say that the deterioration of ties between Korea and Japan is of a greater concern concern, as it poses a serious threat to the U.S., South Korea, Japan trilateral alliance. But while South Korea and Japan are drawing apart, North Korea and Japan are drawing closer. Now here you see Kent Calder, who is the director of the Edwin O. Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies, and he says the improved ties are only temporary and meant to act as a counterbalance to stronger ties between Seoul and Beijing. Calder says there is a limit to how much closer Tokyo and Pyongyang can get. And as for Japan's larger military role in the region, Calder says that's not much of a concern. Japan's powers are overestimated, he says, as it has a rapidly aging population, which means a lot of government funds will need to be channeled there. Now, moving on over to 중앙일보, the headline here reads, "Any good ideas or brilliant ideas, we will give you 4% of total sales." Now, this is what LG Electronics, Korea's second largest consumer electronics company, says it began doing earlier this week. The idea is pretty much similar to what crowdsourcing websites like the US-based company Quirky do, where they take ideas from people and bring them into the market. Now, here, the paper shows the process. Now, an idea gets proposed, and when it passes through 3 qualification rounds, which include consumer testing and evaluations by LG Electronics, the idea is finally made into a product. Now, and it's not just the inventor that gets 4% of the sales, but also anyone who took part in the product development. Now, finally, moving on over to 동아일보 over here, and the headline here reads, Mobile World Cup. Now, the story shows in numbers how Koreans are shifting away from PCs and TVs and toward mobile phones when viewing major sporting events. The image here compares the percentage of those that watched the Olympics in 2012 and this year's World Cup on televisions, the mobile internet, and on their computers using their internet. Now, while the number of those that watched the major sporting events dropped for TVs and PCs, the percentage of those that use mobile internet actually rose from 18% for the Olympics 2 years ago to nearly 59% for the World Cup this year. Now, that does it for this week's look at some of the eye-catching stories from the local papers.
Hello everyone, it's sports time, starting with baseball. The rain threatened to put a damper on All-Star Weekend, with the Futures game delayed, then eventually canceled. Fortunately, the storm clouds moved on, and the 2014 KBO All-Star Game got underway. It was the Western and Eastern League going head-to-head. Now we go to the second inning. The West scores first. Kang Jung-ho hits a 2-run homer. Then later, Mo Chang-min follows suit. Then we go on to the next inning. More West. This time, Park Byung-ho blasts one into the stands for 3 more. Then more in the 4th inning. The West again. They score 3. And this is all before the 5th inning, when the West's Na Ju-won hits a 3-run shot, and they're running away with it. The East finally gets on the board in the 7th, but the Western League All-Stars go on to win this one 13-2. And Park Byung-ho was named Mr. All-Star for his first MVP honors there. But prior to the game, the fans, players, managers, and the league took time to honor Park Chan-ho, the first South Korean to play in the major leagues. The 41-year-old took the field donning a Hanwha Eagles jersey, number 61, of course. He threw the ceremonial first pitch and was honored with a custom trophy. Park said that it was a special moment for him and that he learned many life lessons on the baseball field. And capping off his speech, he said he would do his utmost best to advance Korean baseball to a higher level. And looking overseas, the UEFA has eased its yellow card suspension rule for the Champions League and Europa League competitions. Europe's football governing body said that players' yellow cards would expire after the quarterfinals, which means that they'll no longer miss the finals due to card accumulation. However, players receiving red cards will still be suspended. The rule was called into question following many instances where stars missed the crucial final match after picking up cards in the semifinals. And ending off, it's the Open Championship at Royal Liverpool. The weather was behind the players for round 1 of the storied major. And Rory McIlroy shot to the top of the leaderboard after an efficient 6 under 66. He's looking to avoid a round 2 meltdown that's plagued him before. Tiger Woods, meanwhile, shot an impressive 3 under par in his first competitive round since returning from injury. The tournament runs through to the final round on Sunday. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. Have a great weekend, and I'll be back here next week with more from the world of sports.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the latest weather update. It was a rainy Friday for most regions and more precipitation is in store. Through tomorrow, both Jeollado provinces as well as Gyeongsang-Namdo are looking at up to 70 millimeters of rain, while the central regions are forecast to receive between 5 and 40 millimeters. At the moment, some regions down south are getting up to 20 millimeters per hour of heavy downpours. Now, for those of you making plans for the weekend, rain will fall tomorrow, but Sunday will mostly be sunny and clear. Now, today is Chobok here in Korea, which marks the beginning of summer. Traditionally, ginseng chicken soup, or better known as samgyetang, is eaten on this day in order to get physically ready for the summer heat. So, if you haven't already, it would be a good idea to grab a bowl of samgyetang over the weekend, as it is shaping up to be a hot and humid one. On to Saturday's readings. Seoul and Daegu soar to the low 30s. Gwangju and Busan hit 30. On to other places. Daejeon and Mount Kumgang also peak at 30, while Jeju makes it to 29. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more updates after midnight. See you then.
All right, and that does it for us tonight. Thanks for watching.
Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.